today. My name is Violette. I'm a Palestinian organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. Make some noise! We are here today with workers from Google and Amazon who refuse to sit back, who refuse to stay silent when Google and Amazon are complicit in apartheid, in the violence of apartheid and settler colonialism. We are here to demand that Google and Amazon end Project Nimbus, $1.2 billion profits off of the oppression of our people. This must end, this must stop. In solidarity with the workers speaking out, we are also here with the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, Empower Change, Jewish Voice for Peace, and dozens of other organizations with the Palestine Action Network. We are standing here today in so-called San Francisco on unceded Ohlone territory, on top of the village site of Yalamu. As Palestinians, we fight for our people back home against apartheid. We know we must fight against suppression and for oppressed people everywhere. We remember and recognize where we stand and whose land we stand on, the history and the present of oppression and resistance here too. It is a commitment and a responsibility. Here in occupied Ohlone territory, this city was built on the backs of Black, Indigenous, poor, and working people. This city was built by poor and working people, the same people who are now being displaced out, gentrified out, and pushed out of their town, of their city that they've grown up in for generations. Just down the street at 24th and Mission, immigrants and brown people are being fenced off at Bar Plaza, unable to make a living for their families. As Palestinians, we know our fight for self-determination, sovereignty, and liberation is not separate from the fight for our indigenous siblings and the rematriation of Ohlone land. It's not separate from the fight against gentrification on 24th and Mission. We know the surveillance, the technology that Google and Amazon are selling to the Israeli military and government today, tomorrow, it's going to be used on these same people and these same communities. Our liberation struggle is won. Our fight is won, and we want freedom and justice for us all. And we are here with all of you today because I know that you want justice too. Do you want justice? Yeah. Tell me what you want, what you really want. Justice. Tell me what you need, what you really need. Justice. How are we gonna get it? People power. How are we gonna get it? People power. Tell me what you want, what you really want. Justice. Tell me what you need, what you really need. Justice. How are we gonna get it? People power. How are we gonna get it? People power. These companies are profiting off of our families' oppression, off of Palestinian livelihood, our families' lives. Google and Amazon workers have stood up against their companies despite the fear of retaliation and the consequences. I am honored to stand here in front of you all with Isreal and with all of the brave workers who have taken a stand for justice. You all have my deepest appreciation and my deepest respect. And we know it is the workers from across the globe that will lead us to.
Thank you so much, everyone who is here today. We are here representing the hundreds of workers and community members, sending our message to Google and Amazon loud and clear: no tech for apartheid. I'm a Google worker. I worked at Google. Well, I was a Google worker. I worked at Google for 7 years, and I resigned last week due to Google's culture of unlawful retaliation and hostility against workers who take a stand against unethical company behaviors and in support of Palestinian rights. Artificial Intelligence Research Institute.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you for everybody here that came out to fight for Palestinian rights and against Zionism. I'm Alexander. I'm a director of research at the Distributed AI Research Institute, or DARE. I'm also an Arab American trans woman and a former Googler. I stand here in solidarity with Ariel, anti-Zionist Jewish people and Palestinian people at Google and everywhere. Project Nimbus cements Google and Amazon's commitment to deploy AI technology for social harm to support their bottom line. At Google, I worked for the ethical AI team along with doctors Tanit Jabru and Meg Mitchell, who were fired for doing their jobs and writing a paper on a type of technology which reinforces the centralization of power and data for tech mega corporations, including Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft. This is not the first time that Google has decided to use its AI tools to enable racist displacement, surveillance, and imperialism. Massive internal organizing fomented after news broke out on Project Maven, which would have enabled AI warfare. In response, Google developed several AI principles to defang worker organizing and have those red lines which establish that these tools should not be used for harm or surveillance. However, Project Nimbus goes against all of that. Amnesty and Human Rights Watch have deemed Israel an apartheid state. In May 2021, Israel settlers continued their long history of annexation and forced Palestinians out of their homes in Sheikh Jarrah, an action which the UNOHCHR deemed as a violation of international law. The seizing of those homes served as a prelude to the Israeli war in Gaza later that summer, which killed hundreds of Palestinians and injured thousands more. Moreover, Israel maintains one of the most robust security states on this planet, rivaling only the United States in its pervasiveness and ubiquity. Project Nimbus would enable, if not supercharge, these patterns of violence, dispossession, and surveillance. Employees with a conscience like Ariel and the people here are one of the last bulwarks against tech companies' worst excesses. And they highlight the absolute need to put people over profit. Google, Amazon, do the right thing. Drop Project Nimbus. There should be no tech for war, no tech for apartheid. In solidarity.
Let's make some noise for Alex! Google and Amazon workers are standing up for Palestinian rights and facing repression, retaliation from their companies. And we must stand with them. Today, we bring our voices, we add our voices in support for all of these workers who refuse to let this technology be used to fuel apartheid and oppression. Let's raise our voices for the workers. Up next, we have Sharif Zakout with the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. Sharif is a Bay Area born and raised organizer and cultural worker. His family comes from Al-Najdal Asqalan region in Palestine, many who still live in Gaza since the Nakba. He is an organizer with the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. Make some noise for Sharif!
Make some noise for yourselves for being out here today. Drop Project Nimbus! Drop Project Nimbus! Drop Project Nimbus! Hello everyone, my name is Sharif Zakout. I'm an organizer with the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, also known as AROC. My family is from Gaza, Palestine, but I was also born and raised right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I want to start off by thanking Ariel and the workers for taking such a bold stance against their employers. San Francisco, that's right, give it up to them, give it up to them. San Francisco, we are no stranger to the harms of big tech like Google and Amazon. They have demonstrated their inability to stay principled, displacing our communities, sharing information with law enforcement, and now there's this 1.2 billion contract with Nimbus with the Israeli government. Not only is this supporting an occupying force and honing their
teachers, speech, and writing. There is no such thing as neutrality when it comes to making it easier to conduct state-sponsored terror against an occupied population. There's no neutrality in that. And I have no doubt in my mind that this technology will only exacerbate the horrible conditions that Palestinians live under a hyper-surveillance state. And so it's important to ask ourselves this question. What are the long-term impacts of this type of technology? In whose hands will this technology ultimately end up in? It's bad enough that it's being given to the Israeli army, but also why have we not identified the role that the state of Israel plays in worldwide repression? My family in Gaza has become lab experiments for these types of tools. And after they are tested, they are then packaged and sent to repressive governments and law enforcement agencies all over the world, including right here in the Bay Area, primarily to be used against black and brown communities. This is a direct contradiction of our city. We cannot be a city that claims to uplift and support communities when the technologies developed for targeting occupied populations are ultimately shared with ICE and law enforcement. We cannot support communities here without supporting the self-determination and struggle of the Palestinian people. Our struggles are intertwined, and our aspirations for dignity necessitate solidarity. Now I want to be clear. We are aligned with the workers and not with their employers. There is no excuse for taking over $1 billion to work with an occupying force that ultimately serves the interests of all those we claim to be against here in the city. If these companies had any real principles, their goals should be on serving and repairing the relationships with communities that they've harmed and displaced. And a good step in that direction would be to end this Nimbus contract. I want to recognize the power of workers, especially here in the Bay Area. Back in 2014 and then again in 2021, we, the Bay Area, were able to stop the Zim shipping line from docking in the Port of Oakland. We should be proud because no other city in the world has achieved this. And they could not have been done without the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local 10 port workers. Last year, here in San Francisco, the United Educators of San Francisco took a bold step in passing a resolution in support of BDS and Palestinian resistance. And today, we are seeing Google and Amazon workers speaking out against the occupation of Palestine. These workers and their principled stance is a shining example for how to show worker solidarity with the people of Palestine and to all who struggle for a dignified living around the world. Here in the Bay Area, we recognize the power of workers, the necessity of solidarity, and the importance of having the political will to stand by what is right. So again, I want to amplify these workers' demands. I want to thank Isreal and all the workers here today standing with us for their bravery. We need more workers like them to take a stand, to say something when it conflicts with their moral principles. We deeply appreciate the workers who are courageously standing up to employers to say no to a contract that harms the Palestinian people, and we amplify their demands and the Nimbus contract. So again, we as the Bay Area, we will continue to build with workers and once again show that there is no room for apartheid in the Bay Area, no room for Zionism in the Bay Area, and no room for occupation here in the Bay Area. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine! Thank you, Sharif. Thank you, the Urban Resource Organizing Center, for all your work. As Sharif was saying, Israel's weapon and security industry is one of the largest and the most profitable in the world. Israel sells this technology as field tested, as in that this technology that is tested on Palestinians, Israel used to make a profit and to spread that state violence and that repression across the world, in the Philippines, in Colombia, against black and brown communities here in the States as well. we have Lisa Rofel from the Jewish Voice for Peace. Lisa teaches cultural anthropology at UC Santa Cruz, is an active member of JVP Bay Area, and is also on JVP National Board. Make some noise for Lisa.
I'm so happy to see you all here. Give it up for the Google workers. Yeah! Jewish Voice for Peace is an anti-Zionist organization of Jews and allies working for Palestinian freedom and a Judaism beyond Zionism. All right. Which is why we are appalled by Google's oppressive anti-Palestinian policies, both within the workplace and through its contracts with the Israel military and government. All workers deserve a workplace where they can safely speak up for better working conditions and in defense of human rights. All right. All right. That's why we thank the Google workers here today who are bravely demanding that their labor not be used to power Israeli apartheid. We support them 100%. Whoa! Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Alex. Thank you to all the workers who are here today. So instead, what does Google do? It punishes these brave workers for holding Google to the standards it claims to follow. Google should lift up, not silence and punish, Palestinian, Muslim, Arab, anti-Zionist, Jewish, and other allied Googlers who stand up for Palestinian human rights in pursuit of building a more ethical Google. These brave and principled workers are facing censorship and discipline for standing in solidarity with Palestinians to oppose Israeli apartheid and occupation. This is absolutely unacceptable in a company that professes to be committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As an anti-Zionist Jewish organization, we are outraged that Jewish Googlers like Ariel are systematically silenced or expelled from Jewish Googler community spaces just for standing up for Palestinian human rights and speaking out against Project Nimbus and Israeli apartheid. Google is silencing anti-Zionist voices to avoid being held accountable for harming Palestinians through its contract with the Israeli military and its apartheid government. Many of those who take this brave, principled stance of speaking up for Palestinian rights and speaking out against Project Nimbus have been accused of being anti-Semitic. One Google employee was told that the phrase "support Palestine" is anti-Semitic. This weaponization of the charge of anti-Semitism must end. Google is supporting a country, Israel, that has been occupying another, Palestine, for over 70 years. A government that flaunts international law, a state and military that is engaged in widely recognized atrocities, and a country that has been labeled an apartheid regime by leading international human rights organizations. There is no justification for Project Nimbus. Google will be strengthening Israel's capacity to further brutalize Palestinians and further consolidate the occupation of Palestine through the expansion of illegal settlements. If Google actively supports the Israeli military and government, its technology will facilitate the inevitable killings of Palestinians, the Palestinian human rights. Drop Project Nimbus. Drop Project Nimbus.
Tech from Amazon and Google.
From Amazon and Google.
You can't claim that you are neutral.
You can't claim that you are neutral.
Tech from Amazon and Google.
Tech from Amazon and Google.
Occupation made more brutal.
Occupation made more brutal.
Tech from Amazon and Google.
Tech from Amazon and Google.
You can't claim that you are neutral.
You can't claim that you are neutral.
Team, and she is a member of the Alphabet Workers Union. Paxton.
Hi everyone, I'm a Jewish Google and Nixon military. Thank you so much for coming today. Over the last 5 years, Google has bid on at least 5 major military contracts, at least that we're aware of. Google has not been very transparent with its workers, so a lot of what we do know is from third-party sources, but what we do know is that Google has shown a pattern of assisting the military and the police. Google started pursuing and being granted various certifications for government contracting about 5 years ago. Just a year after its first certification, Google started aggressively pursuing military contracts, starting with Project Maven in 2017, a $250 million contract providing AI that could be used to improve drone strikes. And then bidding 2 years later in 2019 on a contract with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the CBP. This took place right in the midst of a public outcry of children in cages being separated from their families and immigrants dying in custody. And just last year, Google was awarded the $1.2 billion contract that is Project Nimbus. Same with the CBP bid, this took place right in the midst of a public outcry, but this time against Israel's human rights violations during the Safe Shake Shaw campaign. Going in direct opposition to the widely publicized public discourses around the CBP and the human rights violations in Israel, Google has shown how uncommitted it is to using its technology responsibly by going after these contracts anyway. And this year, Google has bid on and is set to be awarded a contract building the DoD's Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability, the JWCC program, building the next generation of U.S. military technology. From what we do know as workers, about Google militarism, we have not had input on. When the CBP contract was revealed, Google's leadership told its workers their tech would not be used to harm immigrants on the southern border, yet the Intercept confirmed it in a 2020 article that the CBP was indeed using our image recognition software at the border. And for the JWCC contract this year that Google was awarded, a Google spokesperson directly admitted our AR principles basically don't apply, and the military can use our technology however they want. For Project Maven, employees and academics mobilized with open letters and activism, and over a dozen employees resigned in 2018. This activism played a direct part in Google not seeking renewal of the contract. So let's mobilize here for Project Nimbus, so please continue to sign the petitions, march, and speak out. Thank you.
I'm Lisa Rofel, University of California, Santa Cruz, professor of anthropology.
Has the University of California taken a stand on this
No.
issue? You think they should?
Well, they had a group who tried to get them to put a statement about anti-Semitism as a charge against those who criticize Israel, but they did not adopt it in their formal rules. They put it in the preamble for their statement about civil rights.
I mean, there's been an issue of accusing academics of being anti-Semitic for being critical of Israel.
I'm sorry, say
There's
that again?
an issue. Academics have been
Yes.
accused of being,
Yes.
anti-Semitic because they're critical.
Still are.
Is that taking place in the University of California?
Yes, absolutely. It's taken place all over the University of California. I myself was brought up on charges 3 times for being accused of creating an anti-Semitic atmosphere on campus for criticizing Israel.
You're Jewish.
And I grew up as an Orthodox Jew. Yes.
So they tried to fire you?
No, I had tenure, and fortunately, the vast majority of my colleagues know who I am and understood what I was doing. So nobody supported that.
Doesn't that intimidate people to fear for their jobs if they do speak up?
I think I had tenure, but I think it does intimidate people who do not have job security. Absolutely, yes. And I encourage them sometimes to do it anonymously.
The University of California has a lot of investments. Richard Blum was involved in investments, the pension fund. Are you concerned about investments of the university?
I have not heard exactly what those investments are. I'd like to know the details before I speak out on them.
You think they should be investing in Israel?
No, I don't think they should be investing in any country that has such violation of human rights.
It's an issue of principle.
Yes, I think they should act that way.
And the corporatization of the university, you think that's part of the issue?
I'm sorry?
The corporatization of the university, how the university has been corporatized?
I think that is part of the issue in the larger sense of faculty losing democratic rights to speak out about where the university should be going.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry?
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Wasim Haj. I'm with the Arab Resource and Organizing Center.
So, what's going on here today?
So today we're here to support Amazon and Google workers who are standing up against a multi-billion-dollar contract that Amazon and Google are attempting to be involved with the state of Israel, called Project Nimbus, that we believe and the workers believe will affect and amplify surveillance and violence and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians by the Israeli government.
And there are Google workers here who are participating. Is that a new development?
They're participating as part of their union, the ABC union. So is it a new development? I actually don't know the answer to that question.
You think it's going to grow?
I think so. I mean, if today's rally, which is pretty sizable, I think something like 200 or 300 here today, is any indication, there is a shifting consensus around in the United States and in the popular media around Palestine. A lot of the old myths are being overturned, and the realities of occupation and colonization are being laid bare. So I think what we're going to see is, just as there's been a huge upsurge of workers in education and like for example the dock workers here in Oakland taking on Palestine as a social justice issue, I think we're going to see more tech workers as well.
What can people do who want to support this effort?
For folks who want to support this effort, you can follow a couple different organizations. You can Google the ABC Workers Union San Francisco. You can look up my organization, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, AROC Bay Area, on Instagram. And if for folks who are interested in getting involved, just see what kind of actions are available. There might be petitions, there might be protests, there might be mobilizations ready to go, and see where you want to plug in.
This isn't the last protest.
I wouldn't imagine so. It's not like this project is just going to end because we're here today, but it's one step in many.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Google, they didn't exist. It was IBM and Kodak and Xerox, together with all the U.S. big corporations that make billions of profits every year in South Africa. And when it came to IBM, without IBM's providing surveillance equipment to the police, the secret police, the military, and the entire government of South Africa, its terrible, fascist, racist, apartheid system could not have existed. So all those corporations were there feasting for a long time while the movement went on. And then in 1986, Kodak announced it was leaving. And the Washington Post called up the spokesperson and said, "Why are you leaving?" He said, "Well, things didn't change fast enough for us, so we're pulling out." We're alive. They've been there since 1913. Things weren't working out? No, there was a worldwide uprising against apartheid in 1985 and 1986. From the docks of San Francisco to the halls of Washington, D.C. and the Congress, people rose up against it. That's why they left. That's the only reason change comes, is when the people take action. So it took a long time. You know, I remember in the 70s and the 80s and the anti-apartheid movement that it seemed like so far off that apartheid could come to an end. But when it did, there was a South African revolutionary who said, "Every revolution is impossible until it happens, and then it was always inevitable. It is inevitable